The card still lay on the table, unopened, mocking me with its cheerful birthday wishes. The cake, a pathetic, half-eaten chocolate monstrosity, mirrored the hollowness in my gut. My son's words echoed in my head, each syllable a shard of glass twisting deeper. I wish you would just disappear. I'd stood there, frozen, the festive decorations suddenly feeling like garish accusations. He'd said it with such cold conviction, such utter disdain, that the life we'd built together seemed to crumble into dust before my fairy eyes. If you've ever felt the sharp sting of family betrayal, subscribe and share your story. We're a family here, and we listen. My name is Olivia, and for 26 years, Daniel had been the sun in my sky. I poured everything into raising him, sacrificing dreams and ambitions without a second thought. His father, Mark, hadn't been in the picture much, a fleeting presence lost to the lure of the road and a younger woman. I juggled 2 jobs, sewed costumes for school plays, and stayed up late helping with science projects, all fueled by the unwavering belief that I was building a strong foundation for his future. I beamed with pride at every graduation, every award, every milestone he conquered. I convinced myself that the sacrifices were worth it, that the bond between a mother and son was unbreakable, a fortress against the storms of life. He went to the best schools, wore the best clothes, never wanted for anything that I could provide. Maybe I spoiled him. Maybe I wrapped him in cotton wool for too long. Now, seeing the cruel glint in his eyes as he delivered that venomous birthday wish, I wondered if I'd inadvertently created a monster. Had my unwavering devotion somehow warped him into this callous stranger standing before me? The weeks leading up to his birthday had been strained, admittedly. He'd been distant, irritable, snapping at me over the smallest things. I chalked it up to work stress, the pressures of climbing the corporate ladder. He worked long hours at a prestigious finance firm downtown, and I knew the competition was fierce. He had always strived for perfection. It was his defining trait. I tried to be understanding, offering a listening ear and a comforting presence, but my efforts were met with curt dismissals and closed doors. There were whispers on the phone, hushed conversations that ceased abruptly when I entered the room. I'd even caught him sneaking out late at night a few times, offering flimsy excuses about needing to clear his head. My mother's intuition, that nagging voice I'd always trusted, told me something was amiss, but I pushed it aside. I wanted to believe in him, to trust that he was still the loving son I knew, the boy who used to bring me wildflowers and scribble heartfelt notes on napkins.
The party itself was a small affair, just the 2 of us at his favorite Italian restaurant. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension, a suffocating blanket of unease. I tried to make conversation, asking about his job, his friends, his future plans, but he responded with monosyllabic answers and averted gazes. He picked at his food, barely touching the expensive pasta dish he'd ordered. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he pushed his plate away, leaned back in his chair, and fixed me with a stare that sent a chill down my spine. "Mom," he began, his voice devoid of any warmth, "there's something I need to say." I braced myself, expecting a confession about a career setback, a relationship problem, anything but what came next. He didn't want a gift, he declared. Not a new car, not a fancy watch, not even a heartfelt card. All he wanted, the only thing that would truly make him happy, was for me to disappear from his life. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, as the other diners faded into a blurry background. It felt as if someone had punched me in the gut, all the air rushing out of my lungs. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand an explanation, but I couldn't find my voice. The shock rendered me speechless, paralyzed by the sheer cruelty of his words. I managed a week. "What did you say?" Hoping against hope that I had misheard him, that it was all some horrible misunderstanding. But he simply repeated his demand, his voice even colder and more resolute than before. This wasn't a fleeting outburst of anger. This was a carefully considered, deliberate act of rejection. Without a word,
I stood up, grabbed my purse, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the unopened card and the half-eaten cake behind. Each step was leaden, each breath a struggle. The city lights blurred through my tears as I stumbled down the street, the weight of his betrayal crushing me. I drove home in a daze, the radio a meaningless drone in the background. I walked inside the house we had built together, a home that was now just a hollow shell. I sat down at the kitchen table, the silence deafening, and stared blankly at the wall. I thought of all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights, all the love I had poured into him, and a wave of nausea washed over me. I had given him everything, and in return, he had shattered my heart into a million pieces.
Then, just 1 hour later, the doorbell rang. 2 uniformed officers stood on my porch, their faces grim. "We need to speak with Daniel," one of them said, his voice official and devoid of emotion. My blood ran cold. What had he done? Had he been involved in an accident? Had he gotten into trouble with the law? 1,000 horrifying scenarios raced through my mind. I led them inside, my hands trembling, and pointed them towards the living room, where Daniel was engrossed in a video game, oblivious to the impending storm. The officers approached him, their movements deliberate and purposeful. "Daniel," one of them said, his voice firm, "we have a warrant for your arrest." Daniel looked up, his face registering a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "What is this about?" he demanded, his tone indignant. The officer simply held up the warrant. "Fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to obstruct justice," he read, his voice unwavering. Daniel's face paled, his eyes widening in disbelief. As they placed him in handcuffs, he looked at me, his expression a mask of shock and betrayal. "Mom," he pleaded, "tell them they've got the wrong guy. Tell them I would never do anything like this." I remained silent, my gaze unwavering, as they led him out of the house I had sacrificed everything for, the house where I now sat alone, the weight of his betrayal compounded by the crushing weight of his crimes. The person I trusted most was one of them. I remembered snippets of conversations now, things that hadn't made sense at the time, the coded language, the secretive meetings. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. He wasn't just distant and irritable. He was hiding something big, something that could destroy everything. And now, as he sat in a jail cell, facing serious charges, I realized that his birthday wish had come true, just not in the way he had intended. He wanted me to disappear from his life. And in a way, I had. The woman he thought he knew, the doting mother who had always put him first, had vanished. In her place stood a woman who was ready to fight back, to expose the truth, and to ensure that justice was served, no matter the cost. The following days were a blur of legal consultations, police interviews, and media inquiries. My quiet life had been ripped apart, replaced by a chaotic whirlwind of accusations, investigations, and public scrutiny. The phone rang incessantly, each call a fresh wave of anxiety. Reporters camped outside my house, their cameras flashing, their questions relentless. Friends and neighbors, once so warm and welcoming, now averted their gazes, their faces etched with suspicion and discomfort. The weight of the situation pressed down on me, suffocating me with its sheer enormity. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. I tossed and turned each night, haunted by nightmares of Daniel in prison, of his accusers, of the life we had lost. Every sound, every shadow seemed to amplify my fear and uncertainty. Food held no appeal. I forced myself to eat small meals, just enough to keep going, but the taste was always bland and unsatisfying. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, trapping me with its memories and its silence. I wandered from room to room, touching familiar objects, trying to recapture the feeling of normalcy, but it was no use. The past was gone, replaced by a present filled with pain and a future shrouded in doubt. I tried to visit Daniel in jail, hoping to understand what had driven him to commit such acts, but he refused to see me. His lawyer explained that he was under strict instructions not to communicate with anyone outside his legal team. I was devastated, but I understood. He blamed me for his predicament, for calling the police, for exposing his crimes. In his eyes, I was the enemy, the one who had destroyed his life. Desperate to clear his name,
or at least understand the full extent of his involvement, I hired a private investigator. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I gave him everything I had: bank statements, phone records, emails, anything that might shed light on Daniel's activities. The investigator, a seasoned professional named Mr. Harding, was thorough and discreet. He promised to leave no stone unturned, to uncover every secret, every lie, every hidden connection. As he delved deeper into Daniel's life, a disturbing picture began to emerge. It turned out that Daniel had been involved in a complex web of financial fraud, working with a group of unscrupulous individuals to embezzle millions of dollars from his firm. He had been living a double life, using the stolen money to fund a lavish lifestyle of expensive cars, designer clothes, and exclusive parties. He had even been planning to leave the country to start a new life with his girlfriend, a woman I had never even heard of. The information was devastating, each revelation a fresh wound. I couldn't reconcile the image of the son I knew, the boy who used to bring me wildflowers, with the cold, calculating criminal that Mr. Harding described. Had I been so blind, so naive, that I had failed to see the darkness that lurked beneath the surface? Was I responsible in some way for the path he had chosen? The pressure from the media intensified as Daniel's trial approached. Every news outlet in the city was covering the story, painting him as a ruthless conman who had betrayed the trust of his colleagues and his community. I became a pariah, hounded by reporters, shunned by my friends, and judged by strangers. I received hate mail, threatening phone calls, even vandalism on my property. I was afraid to leave the house, afraid of the stares, the whispers, the accusations. I felt isolated and alone, trapped in a nightmare with no escape. The legal fees were mounting, draining my savings and forcing me to consider selling the house.
I had always been financially independent, but Daniel's actions had jeopardized everything I had worked so hard to achieve. I felt a sense of despair, a fear that I would lose everything: my son, my reputation, my home, my future. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, I still clung to a sliver of hope that he might be innocent, that there was some explanation for his actions. I couldn't bear the thought of him spending years in prison, of his life being ruined forever. I decided to attend the trial, to face him in court, to look him in the eye and ask him why. I needed to hear it from him, to understand what had gone wrong, to find some way to forgive him, even if he couldn't forgive himself. I knew it would be painful, humiliating, and emotionally draining, but I felt I owed it to myself, to him, and to the memory of the son I once knew. This would be my last attempt to reach him, to salvage what was left of our relationship, to find some semblance of peace in the midst of chaos. The day of the trial arrived like a storm cloud, heavy with dread and foreboding. I dressed in a simple black suit, the color reflecting the darkness that had consumed my life. As I walked into the courtroom, the air crackled with anticipation. The room was packed, every seat filled with reporters, spectators, and curious onlookers, all eager to witness the spectacle of a son betraying his mother. I spotted Daniel sitting at the defense table, his face pale and drawn. He avoided my gaze, his eyes fixed on the floor. My heart ached at the sight of him, but I hardened my resolve. I was there for justice, not for pity. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence against Daniel: financial records, emails, witness testimonies, all painting a damning picture of his guilt. They argued that he was a master manipulator, a con artist who had used his charm and intelligence to deceive his colleagues and steal their money. They portrayed him as a cold, calculating criminal, devoid of remorse or empathy. Daniel's lawyer attempted to poke holes in the prosecution's case, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial, that Daniel was a victim of circumstance, that he had been framed by his business partners. But their arguments were weak and unconvincing. The jury listened intently, their faces grim, their eyes never leaving Daniel. As the trial wore on, I began to feel a sense of detachment, as if I were watching a play unfold on a stage. The characters were familiar, but their actions were foreign and incomprehensible. I saw my son, but I didn't recognize him. I heard his name,
but it felt like a stranger's. The weight of his betrayal pressed down on me, crushing me with its immensity.
Then came my turn to testify. I walked to the witness stand, my legs trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. I swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. The prosecutor asked me about my relationship with Daniel, about his childhood, about his aspirations. I spoke honestly and openly, painting a picture of a loving, devoted mother who had sacrificed everything for her son. I described the pride I felt at his achievements, the joy he brought into my life, the unwavering belief I had in his potential. But I also spoke of the strain that had developed between us in recent months, the distance, the secrecy, the feeling that he was hiding something from me. I recounted the events of his birthday, the cruel words he had spoken, the shock and devastation I had felt. As I spoke, I saw Daniel's face contort with pain and regret. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the boy I once knew, the boy who used to bring me wildflowers. But then the mask dropped back into place, and his expression hardened once more. The defense attorney cross-examined me, trying to discredit my testimony, to suggest that I was biased against my son, that I was exaggerating his crimes. But I stood my ground, answering their questions calmly and truthfully, refusing to be intimidated or manipulated. I was there to speak the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The verdict came late in the evening. The jury had deliberated for hours, their decision hanging in the air like a sword of Damocles. As the judge read the verdict, the courtroom fell silent. "Guilty," he declared, his voice echoing through the room. "Guilty on all counts." A gasp rippled through the crowd. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. Justice had been served. Daniel was led away in handcuffs, his face ashen, his eyes filled with despair. As he passed me, he whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." I didn't respond. His apology meant nothing to me now. The damage was done. He had destroyed our lives, and no amount of remorse could ever undo the pain he had caused. I walked out of the courtroom, surrounded by reporters and photographers. Their questions were relentless, their flashes blinding. I ignored them, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other, determined to escape the chaos and find some peace. When I arrived home, the house felt empty and desolate. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the clock. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall. The weight of the past few months crashed down on me, crushing me with its enormity. I had lost my son, my reputation, my home, my future. I had nothing left. I reached into the drawer and pulled out a bottle of sleeping pills. I stared at them for a long time, contemplating the oblivion they offered. Maybe it would be better to just end it all, to escape the pain and the suffering. But then a flicker of defiance ignited within me. I thought of all the sacrifices I had made, all the battles I had fought, all the hardships I had overcome. I thought of the woman I used to be, the strong, independent, resourceful woman who had always found a way to survive. And I realized that I couldn't give up. I wouldn't let Daniel's actions define me. I wouldn't let him destroy my life. I slammed the bottle of pills back into the drawer, my hand trembling. I would survive this. I would rebuild my life. I would find a way to move on, to heal, to find happiness again. But first, I would make them pay. They thought they had broken me, that I was weak and helpless. They thought they could get away with their crimes, that they could destroy my family and my life without consequences. But they were wrong. I was stronger than they thought, and I was about to unleash a storm of revenge that they would never see coming. The woman they thought they knew was gone. In her place stood a force of nature, fueled by rage and determined to exact her pound of flesh. The game had just begun. I started by gathering information. I needed to know everything about Daniel's co-conspirators, their weaknesses, their secrets, their vulnerabilities. I hired Mr. Harding, the private investigator, again, giving him a new mission, to uncover the truth about the people who had corrupted my son. He worked tirelessly, digging into their pasts, interviewing their associates, following their movements. Slowly but surely, a web of deceit and corruption began to emerge. They were all involved in illegal activities, fraud, bribery, money laundering, even worse. They were ruthless, amoral, and driven by greed. They had used Daniel as a pawn in their schemes, exploiting his ambition and his naivete.
They had promised him wealth and success, but in reality, they were just using him to cover their tracks. I learned that their ringleader was a man named Victor Sterling, the CEO of the finance firm where Daniel worked. He was a powerful and influential figure with connections in high places. He had a reputation for being ruthless and unforgiving, and he had a long history of getting away with his crimes. He was the key to everything. If I could take him down, the entire house of cards would collapse. I knew it would be dangerous, that I would be putting myself at risk, but I didn't care. I was prepared to do whatever it took to bring them to justice, to avenge my son, and to reclaim my life. The plan was taking shape, an intricate tapestry of deception and manipulation designed to exploit their weaknesses and expose their crimes. I smiled grimly. They had underestimated me. They thought I was just a grieving mother, a victim to be pitied, but they were about to discover that I was a force to be reckoned with. The day they betrayed me was the day revenge was born.
The information Mr. Harding unearthed was like a roadmap to their destruction. Victor Sterling, the puppet master, was meticulous but arrogant, convinced of his own untouchability. His weakness? A network of offshore accounts used to hide his ill-gotten gains, a digital breadcrumb trail he believed was untraceable. The others, equally culpable, had their own vices: gambling debts, secret affairs, and a penchant for the high life, all fueled by their criminal enterprise. I knew then that my strategy had to be multifaceted, a carefully orchestrated symphony of exposure, legal pressure, and public shaming. I started small, feeding anonymous tips to investigative journalists, hinting at the financial irregularities within Sterling's firm. I knew they were hungry for a story, and the scent of corruption was irresistible bait. The first article was a cautious probe, raising questions about unusual profits and insider trading. Sterling dismissed it as the work of disgruntled employees, but I could sense his unease. The pressure was mounting, and he was starting to feel the heat. I created a secure encrypted email address, using a virtual private network to mask my location. This became my channel for disseminating evidence, leaking documents, and whispering accusations into the ears of those who could do the most damage. I targeted not only the media, but also regulatory agencies, the IRS, and even Sterling's own board of directors. The goal was to create a feeding frenzy, to turn every stone and expose the rot that lay beneath. One of the most damning pieces of evidence was a series of recorded phone calls between Daniel and Sterling, conversations that clearly implicated Sterling in the fraud. Daniel, desperate to impress his mentor, had unwittingly documented their conspiracy. I managed to recover these recordings from Daniel's old phone, a device the police had overlooked. It was a risky maneuver, requiring specialized software and a degree of technical expertise I didn't possess. But I found an expert online, a young hacker with a penchant for justice and a disdain for corporate greed. He worked quickly and discreetly, extracting the recordings and sending them to me via an encrypted file-sharing service. Listening to those conversations was sickening, hearing my son's voice, so eager and trusting, being manipulated by Sterling's cynical directives. It fueled my resolve, hardening my heart against any lingering sympathy I might have felt for Daniel. He had made his choices, and now he had to face the consequences, along with the others who had led him astray. I carefully transcribed the most incriminating portions of the recordings, highlighting Sterling's explicit instructions and Daniel's reluctant compliance. These transcripts became a key weapon in my arsenal, providing undeniable proof of their criminal conspiracy. I leaked them strategically, timing their release to coincide with key events, such as Sterling's public appearances and board meetings. The next phase of my plan involved leveraging the legal system. I contacted a lawyer, a sharp, ambitious woman named Miss Evans, who specialized in white-collar crime. I explained my situation, outlining the evidence I had gathered and my desire to see Sterling and his accomplices brought to justice. She was initially hesitant, citing the risks involved in taking on such a powerful and well-connected adversary. But when I showed her the recordings and the financial records, her eyes widened. She saw the potential for a high-profile case, a chance to make a name for herself and to strike a blow against corporate corruption. She agreed to represent me, working on a contingency basis, her fees contingent on a successful outcome. Miss Evans filed a civil lawsuit against Sterling and his associates, alleging fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. The lawsuit was a public declaration of war, a signal that I was not going to back down, that I was prepared to fight them in court and in the court of public opinion. The lawsuit also served another purpose. It allowed us to subpoena documents and depose witnesses, forcing Sterling and his cronies to answer questions under oath. This was a critical step in uncovering the full extent of their criminal activities and building a case that would stand up in court. As the pressure mounted, Sterling began to crack. He lashed out at his employees, threatened his rivals, and made increasingly desperate attempts to cover his tracks. I watched his unraveling with a cold satisfaction, knowing that his arrogance was his undoing. He underestimated me, assuming that I was just a grieving mother, incapable of posing a serious threat. He was wrong. I was more than just a grieving mother. I was a force of nature, driven by a righteous fury and armed with the truth. The final piece of my plan involved exposing Sterling's personal life, his hidden affairs, and his lavish spending habits. I hired a forensic accountant to trace his assets, uncovering a network of shell corporations and offshore accounts used to conceal his wealth. I then leaked this information to the tabloids, painting a picture of a corrupt executive living a life of obscene luxury while his employees struggled to make ends meet. The public outcry was deafening. Sterling became a pariah, shunned by his peers and reviled by the media. His reputation was in tatters, and his career was in ruins. He tried to fight back, launching a smear campaign against me, accusing me of being a bitter and vengeful woman, but his efforts were futile. The truth was out, and no amount of spin could change the fact that he was a crook and a liar. The day of reckoning was approaching, and I could taste the sweetness of revenge.
Amar প্রতিশোধের গল্প.
The house of cards was about to fall. Sterling, desperate and cornered, made a fatal mistake. He reached out to me directly. A burner phone, a disguised voice, but I knew it was him. He offered me money, a substantial sum, to drop the lawsuit and stop talking to the press. He promised to make things go away. It was an admission of guilt, a confirmation of everything I suspected. But more importantly, it was an opportunity. I played along, feigning interest in his offer. I told him I needed time to think, that I was torn between my desire for justice and my need for financial security. I suggested a meeting, a discreet location where we could discuss the details. He readily agreed. He was so blinded by his arrogance, so convinced that he could manipulate me, that he walked right into my trap. I chose the location carefully, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place with no surveillance cameras and few witnesses. It was isolated and desolate, the perfect setting for a confrontation. I informed Miss Evans of the meeting, and she immediately contacted the authorities. They agreed to set up a sting operation to monitor the meeting and arrest Sterling if he attempted to bribe or threaten me. I knew it was a risky gamble, but I was willing to take the chance. This was my opportunity to bring him down once and for all, to expose his crimes and hold him accountable for his actions. The day of the meeting arrived, and I felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. I dressed in plain clothes, avoiding anything that might draw attention to myself. I arrived at the warehouse early, taking a moment to compose myself before entering. The building was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew and decay. I could hear the faint sound of rats scurrying in the shadows. It was a fitting setting for a meeting with a man like Victor Sterling. I waited inside, my heart pounding in my chest. Every creak and groan of the building sent a shiver down my spine. I knew that the police were nearby, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was alone, facing a dangerous and unpredictable enemy. Finally, I heard the sound of a car approaching. Headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the entrance to the warehouse. A black sedan pulled up, and Sterling emerged, accompanied by 2 hulking bodyguards. He looked nervous and agitated, constantly scanning his surroundings. I could see the sweat beading on his forehead, even in the dim light. He approached me cautiously, his eyes narrowed. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice strained. "I think we can come to an understanding." I nodded slowly, gesturing for him to follow me further into the warehouse. I led him through a maze of empty crates and rusted machinery, deeper and deeper into the darkness. The bodyguards trailed behind us, their eyes alert, their hands hovering near their weapons. I could feel their presence, their unspoken threat. I knew that I had to be careful, that one wrong move could have dire consequences. We reached a small open area in the center of the warehouse. I turned to face Sterling, my expression calm and composed. "I've thought about your offer," I said, my voice steady. And I've decided that I'm not interested." His face hardened, his eyes flashing with anger. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You don't know who you're dealing with." I smiled coldly. "Oh, I think I do," I replied. "I know that you're a liar, a cheat, and a criminal, and I'm going to make sure that everyone else knows it too." I took a step back, reaching into my purse. Sterling's bodyguards tensed, their hands moving towards their guns. But I wasn't reaching for a weapon. I pulled out a small digital recorder, the one I had used to record our phone conversations. I pressed the play button, and Sterling's voice filled the warehouse, his words echoing through the darkness. "I want you to make those numbers disappear." His voice boomed from the recorder. "Do whatever it takes. I don't care how you do it. Just make it happen." Sterling's face turned white. He lunged at me, trying to grab the recorder, but I dodged him easily. The bodyguards moved to intercept me, but before they could reach me, the warehouse doors burst open and a team of police officers swarmed in, their guns drawn. "Police, freeze!" they shouted. The bodyguards hesitated for a moment, then raised their hands in surrender. Sterling stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and despair. He knew it was over. He had been caught red-handed, his crimes exposed for all to see. As the police led him away in handcuffs, he turned to me, his eyes filled with hatred. "You haven't won," he hissed. "This isn't over." I just smiled. "Oh, but it is," I said. "The game is over, Victor, and you've lost." The trap had been sprung, but this was only the beginning. The final act was about to unfold, and it would be more devastating than anything he could imagine. The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. Sterling's arrest was just the opening act. The real spectacle was about to begin. I released everything. The full, unedited recordings, the forensic accounting reports detailing his hidden wealth, the photos of his lavish lifestyle juxtaposed with images of the employees he had cheated and discarded. The internet exploded. News outlets around the world picked up the story, broadcasting his crimes to a global audience. The hashtag #SterlingIsCorrupt trended for days, fueled by a collective outrage against corporate greed and abusive power. His carefully constructed empire crumbled before his eyes. The board of directors of his firm, panicked by the public backlash, immediately terminated his employment, stripping him of his title, his benefits, and his reputation.
His colleagues, once so eager to bask in his success, now distanced themselves from him, feigning ignorance of his criminal activities. His friends, the socialites and power brokers who had once clamored for his attention, now shunned him, afraid of being tainted by his disgrace. The civil lawsuit, now bolstered by irrefutable evidence, proceeded swiftly. Ms. Evans, armed with the recordings and the financial records, decimated Sterling's defense, exposing his lies and contradictions with ruthless precision. He tried to blame Daniel, claiming that he was the mastermind behind the fraud, but the jury saw through his deception. They found him guilty on all counts, awarding me a massive settlement, a sum that would have been unimaginable just a few months prior. But the money was secondary. What mattered was that justice had been served. The criminal trial followed soon after. The evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecution presented a compelling case, detailing Sterling's systematic fraud and his attempts to obstruct justice. He was found guilty of multiple felonies, including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to a lengthy prison term, a punishment that reflected the severity of his crimes. As he was led away to begin his sentence, he turned to me one last time, his face contorted with rage and despair. "You'll pay for this," he spat. "You haven't heard the last of me." I simply smiled. "No, Victor," I replied. "You're the one who's going to pay, and this is the last anyone will hear from you." He was a broken man, stripped of his power, his wealth, and his freedom. His world had collapsed, and he had no one to blame but himself. The others involved in the conspiracy faced similar fates. Some were arrested and charged with crimes, while others were forced to resign from their positions in disgrace. Their reputations were ruined, their careers shattered, and their lives forever tarnished by their association with Victor Sterling. Daniel, my son, was also held accountable for his actions. He cooperated with the authorities, providing testimony against Sterling and the others involved in the fraud. He was spared a prison sentence, but he was ordered to pay restitution and perform community service. He lost his job, his friends, and his standing in the community. He had to live with the knowledge that he had betrayed his family, his friends, and his own values.
In the aftermath, I found a sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that I had done everything I could to bring justice to those who had wronged my family. The pain of losing Daniel would never completely disappear, but I could finally grieve without the weight of anger and resentment. I used the settlement money to establish a foundation in Daniel's name, a charity dedicated to helping young people make ethical choices and avoid the pitfalls of greed and ambition. It was a way to honor his memory and to prevent others from making the same mistakes he had made. I retreated from the public eye, seeking solace in the company of my family and friends. I learned to appreciate the simple things in life, the beauty of nature, the warmth of human connection. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I had reclaimed my life, and I was determined to live it to the fullest. They lost everything. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.